and we're recording. Hooray, we're back. It's another Saturday and we're working again. Amazing.
That's just how it works. That's just what it is. It's welcome to the run up to Bardsung.
Just how we roll. There's not enough days in the week, so we just add more days.
Something like that. Who needs rest?
Not us.
Well, I don't know. I don't get the choice, so it's just what it is. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Everyone. So jobs in games development's really fun. Great times.
Yeah. Do you know I've been doing this for like 25 years now. If you add on all the video game years that I've done, and I don't think I can remember a single year where I wasn't crunching on something at some point in time. I think you just get used to it, don't you?
Yeah, it's nature of the beast. Like, I remember it's a bit of a shock to the system at first, but then I find my days normally I actually just like to completely top load my week, just do really heavy sort of Monday, Tuesdays, and then sort of slowly taper out as the week goes on, because it's just easier to make sure everything's done. And I find that sort of generally fits again with the sort of crunch mentality, or the kind of when you have to start a project and you start really sort of hammering away to make sure everything is done, you can always take your foot off the pedal a little bit towards the end, because at that point you know that you've got much more level of happiness. Everything's been done already.
We've got it all done.
Yeah, I'd rather go flat out and then slow down.
We've got lots of questions, haven't we? Which is rather encouraging. Really,
loads and loads of questions.
Yeah, we've probably ought to crack in. I was just suddenly thinking, I haven't hung out and just chatted with you. We've been full on work mode for a little while, but before we relax into a friendly chat, we should probably do what we're here to do, which is ask and answer some questions from our lovely people in the Five Corners Tavern, or the Five Corners Inn. All things about Bardsung.
Absolutely. And just a slight side note before we go too far, because of the way that your computer's screen is going, if people can actually see us both talking at this point, Teddy is flowing in and out like a ghost poochie, which is quite glorious.
Yeah, he's defying the green screen.
Okay, so jumping straight in then, in which case, first question. How much of this was inspired by role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and how much was inspired by dungeon crawling games like Descent?
How much and how much? Well, I guess the easy answer is 50-50. But I think that's not helpful. There's a sliding scale. So we've always been fascinated by dungeon crawling games. I remember we've played them a lot. We certainly were looking to change how the dungeon exploring experience felt for a game like Dark Souls. We're constantly looking at the new games that come in to market in this genre, and what we're all trying to do is really capture that old school feeling of going into dark, dangerous places and discovering secrets and monsters and taking their stuff, and that really just harkens us back to when we were playing D&D and so it is 50-50, but I guess for me, I've always really wanted to get as close to a D&D experience, but with the accessibility of a board game setup. So that's really the inspiration for Bardsung.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I definitely think you're right there in terms of it's about having the D&D experience with your added accessibility, looking at how user friendly we can actually make things by using some of the board game elements we might introduce. I think in terms of the actual inspiration for, I think depend on developer, designer. Like I know, for example, Fraser and I tend to dive a little bit more into board game than perhaps you do, but I think overall, exactly as you just said, it's something where it's such a rich and vibrant worlds that we all play with in terms of various different games. There's loads of inspiration there that we can draw from everywhere. So
yeah.
So next question, I think we're probably going to land on this one. We've already answered it, but I'll go with it anyway, which is, what made you decide to do a more traditional dungeon crawler, having already made Dark Souls and Resident Evil?
It's a good question. I think the most obvious thing to consider is Dark Souls and Resident Evil are both licensed products, and whilst our partners with Capcom and Namco Bandai are brilliant, we do need to make sure that we're operating within the boundaries of that IP. Whereas with Bardsung, this is an original IP. we're able to really explore the genre with full creative control over absolutely everything we do. And we learned a lot of lessons along the way with certainly with how the AI systems work in Dark Souls. We've taken that, we've refined it, polished it, added all the things that we would like to see to that particular system. Resident Evil, we have the really tight action economy, and the way the tension deck creates emergent narrative opportunities. And I just think there's so many different aspects to games that we've made and will continue to make that will continue to feed into our kind of never-ending quest for perfection. But I think Bardsung really is the culmination of an awful lot of things that we've learned over the years. It's certainly the closest I feel to that kind of true traditional dungeon crawler experience that I've been craving for years.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think for me, it's something where describing Bardsung as a culmination or an evolution so far of what we're looking, where other games have been and led to, I think is a really good one. And I think for a fantasy realm, it's got so much vibrancy, so much potential, such fertile ground to kind of go run with. And it's also something which immediately jumps into everyone's imagination, right? Everyone knows kind of, what a fantasy world looks like and can exist, but the specifics themselves are just so wonderfully open and there's so much to play with. Exactly as you said, it's just a really, really good place to exist. So next one is, this is a game about storytelling. How is this game different in how it handles telling a story than other games that set out to do very similar campaign-like stories? And are there any boons or consequences based on decisive actions one might take?
So how is it different? So one of the things we wanted to make sure Bardsung did was not require a huge setup time. So we really focused in on this sense of exploring the dungeon, and the dungeon is procedurally generated. What we've done is create a number of subsystems that are really accessible from the player's perspective. They're literally just turning an extra card, but these actually create we call them narrative opportunities. And a lot of the emergent storytelling is going to come from around your table and is going to be driven by the people around your table. So you will get the opportunity to discover a lever in a room, and you pull it and you don't necessarily know what it does, and then later on it reveals that actually shut off a portcullis, and now you can't go down that particular route. Well, now there's a story to be told. Why did you have to pull that lever? We should have just left that lever and then come back to it once we knew what it was going to do. And little things like that. There's also other opportunities where you might find, I don't know, a lost broken toy, and then sometime later you bump into a goblin who's looking for this toy, and if you happen to still have it and you give it back to the goblin, then maybe he'll help you out, or he'll tell you a little bit more about the story. And all these little emergent sort of situations happen. These are the sorts of things that happen when we role play, when we play in our Monday night game. These little things people just latch onto and turn them into our story, not just this kind of quirky little thing that's happened. And all of that is set against the backdrop of an overarching campaign. Variables and events that happen through the game, we're actually going to be able to have quite a number of alternative endings, quite a number of side quests that you may or may not discover. And so there's going to be a huge amount of story to discover through this game. And kind of almost like in a postmodern sort of way, what I'm hoping is for people who really get excited about the story and the setting, that they will play through several times in order to get all the different perspectives on what's happening. Yeah, so it's a mix of a fighting fantasy story, choose your own adventure story with procedural emergent storytelling opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think for me, that what you described at the end there with the case of, if you play this game through once, then you will find out, obviously you're not going to be missing anything, but you will find out one particular aspect of the story. If you play through again, then there's real replayability and going back to it again and again to kind of play through and hoover up all of those smaller details and see things from larger perspectives or a larger understanding of what it is. That's very exciting. The other thing that I think for me, it works very well because there's almost two levels of how the stories unfold in this game. The first one is very zoomed in. It's the characters actually going through each individual encounter, and as you've said, kind of finding small artifacts they might then trade with another character somewhere along the way or whatever else. But then you have the larger, more campaign-driven story arc, which is almost obviously influenced by players with their actions and so forth, but sits slightly alongside that at the same time. So you've really got loads and loads of meaningful decisions to make that kind of go forward.
Yep.
So the next question, again, we're kind of answering these with our quite large answers. So we'll touch base on these as we go through. But is there a narrative with a conclusion in the box, or is it all procedural? It would be nice to have an end quest, but with the option to keep playing your own scenarios after.
Well, I love this question because yes, we've already answered. There's more than one ending in the box. There's many, and they are all dependent on the choices that you make as you go through the campaign itself. Is there an option to keep playing your own scenarios afterwards? Absolutely. And one of the things that we would love to start seeing with Bardsung is people taking their characters out of this particular dungeon, right in your own adventures, and when you see how the adventures are structured and how the campaign's structured, I think people are going to get excited about how much power there is in the engine for them to be able to do things like that. So there is just throw down and play, and just play a procedural dungeon, and off you go if you just want to do a bit of dungeon bashing for a couple of hours, or there is a absolutely vast campaign in there with multiple endings.
So that kind of you've touched actually on the next question as well, which is how would you describe the complexity of the game in terms of ease of setting it up and explaining the rules to a new player, and how long would it take?
So explain the rules to players. So one of the things that we are constantly getting much better at all the time is how we onboard players to quite complicated games. If you look at a game where it all began with Guild Ball, it was one of those games that we could show you how to play it in 10 minutes or less, and you would get it. And I've shown it to kids and young adults, all the way through to really experienced gamers. I've shown it to casual gamers and hardcore gamers, competitive, non-competitive, and in 10 minutes you just get it. And that's exactly the same with Bardsung. The core mechanics are actually quite simple to explain, but it's the complexity of the decision making that you need to make at the table, and that really is where the depth of the game can go as deep as you want it to. So if you are playing with a super casual group or a young group, who are not as experienced, well, look, the game's going to play and react, and it's going to do what it does, and you can interact with it at that level. But if you want to get deep into the complexity of how the abilities combo with each other, how you're setting up your weapon sets and item sets in order to maximize, what you're getting out of your activations each time, well, the game's going to respond to that and let you really deep dive into that complexity. So how easy is it to set up? Really easy. It is grab a D20, you roll it, you add a number to it, and you need to beat a target number. It's as simple as that, but it's got huge depth to it.
I think one of the things, just touch on this, one of the things that we know we had as a design concept is absolutely cutting out so much setup time as possible. So it literally is a case of takes off literally out of the box, put your tiles one place, put your cards in another place, put down your starting tile on top of the mat, and then just pretty much start playing. Yeah, is the biggest thing that we try to do, is really streamline this. So it's as we talk about internally with the Christmas Day test, where we hate to have games with lengthy setup and lengthy learning cycles. We really want this to be something where you can get going as quickly as possible. And one thing that obviously our Resident Evil community will definitely attest to, and have done, I actually haven't seen them in the group talking about this, is we've started to get really good now at creating tutorialized rule books. So something where players will open the rule book and they'll start learning the rules in the order they need to learn them, but also in a way that actually kind of communicates the information as quickly as is possible and then concisely as possible, but in an order whereby, so we'll do a tutorial encounter. This will tell us how to play this. Once we finish that, you get into the next section. Congratulations, you've passed. Here's the next few rules you need for the next encounter, and so on. So players are slowly onboarded in a way that doesn't make them feel overwhelmed, and they're constantly working through.
Yep, absolutely.
So the next one again follows on from this, which is, can this game be a good intro game for 10-year-olds?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the it's a great game to introduce someone to the hobby because it's easy to pick up, and has a huge amount of depth for people to grow into. I think with the emergent storytelling opportunity, as well as the structured campaign story that's going on in the background, with the huge extensibility of the character development you can put into play, and how you interact with others around the table, I think it's the kind of game that could really get someone into this great hobby, and really hook them in. So I think we'll reel them in with the simple Christmas Day test and get them playing within 5 minutes, and then we'll hopefully keep them for life as they discover that games like this are just fun forever and just have huge depth and huge complexity to explore.
Yeah, I also think it's about how you interact with the game as well. A lot of what you've described there, for example, might be slightly heavy for a 10-year-old, when you start looking at campaigns and, leveling up characters and all sorts. But it's worth understanding this is also a game that could be played as a standalone experience. There's nothing to stop you simply, as we've said on the Christmas Day, pull out the game, start playing it, and literally just use the basic characters, basic stuff, which I'm 100% sure a 10-year-old can kind of understand and get into. We've talked a lot about kind of very easy to learn and sort of help them along. And that's something where for a 10-year-old, that can actually be the game quite satisfyingly as well. So, and then obviously as they grow older, they can start to look at others, continuing that campaign or whatever else.
A good way of thinking about it is, you take a really complex game like Terraforming Mars or something like that has a huge amount of moving parts, and you kind of have to know all of them right at the beginning before you can make meaningful choices as you go through. But because we're able to introduce players to game systems and game mechanics in a controlled and sequential fashion, it actually means that we can build up to quite a level of complexity, but we just do it one hit at a time, so it becomes very easy to onboard people. If we showed everyone the full depth of Bardsung that's possible right at the very end of the process, and we showed that all up front, then yeah, it would be quite a difficult game to get into, and probably not a great game to onboard a new player or a younger player. But because of the way that we do onboard people, it's absolutely spot on for that.
Yeah, I agree. So we're starting to get into some character questions now, which is kind of fun. So, excuse me. The first one is, can you play solo? Which absolutely you can. I can answer that one immediately. Excuse me, just cough.
Nice.
Yeah. So the second one is,
put a different picture up so we can see some of the characters.
Definitely. So the next one is, will there be a chance to play more than 4 heroes at a time, or is it 4 max? My cousin's brother and I like to play board games together.
Oh, we've got good news here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's really heartwarming. Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the big things we wanted to do is, we know that you get asked the question about 5-player games quite a lot, and I think it's because the average D&D group tends to be kind of 4 people and a dungeon master, right? And one of the big things we wanted to do with this is make it so that if that's your group, then someone doesn't have to sit out. Everyone can be involved. 5 players feels like a really nice sweet spot for doing that.
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, look, the game scales between 1 and 5 players. If you've got a 6-person group, look, it's like a role-playing game. D&D really struggles once you start going north of 6 or 7 players. The CR system starts to fall over, and it just kind of, the action economy just really stops working. So you end up having to slightly tweak it and hack it. But we're able to design this to work brilliantly for 1 person all the way through up to 5 people. If you need to go north of that, then well, look, I don't think it'll be that hard to kind of add an extra hobgoblin to every encounter or whatever suits your table.
Yeah, I think you probably push to 6 semi comfortably, and then we can talk. Yeah, exactly. So, but in any case, so next one is, will you be able to roll your own hero, or are they all pre-generated?
That's a great question.
And I will quickly follow this up with the second one, because I know you're going to break into this immediately, which is, what does leveling up look like?
Okay, so for the board game, the adventures will be pre-generated, because let's grab a picture of Night Feather's board. Largely because we want to be able to control the physical assets that are going into the box. What's interesting is behind the scenes, we actually use a character generation system to create these pre-generated characters. So for us to hit our Christmas Day test, right, which means we want you to open this box and be playing within 5 minutes, the characters are pre-generated. In the future, we will be able to look to sort of sharing or releasing or publishing the full kind of Bardsung RPG engine. But for right now, pre-generate is the way we're going to go. However, that being said, what we have made sure is that leveling up really feels like a open-ended modular experience. So what does leveling up look like is the second part of the question. So as you can see from Nightfeather, they have a number of attributes, the classic 6 up there in the top right-hand corner. And what you can see is Nightfeather currently has +2 Dex, +2 Wisdom, and +1 Int, and but also has upgrade slots, 2 in Strength, another 2 in Dex, so on and so forth. So you can spend your XP to improve your core attributes. And, Nightfeather uses an awful lot of Dex-based abilities, but there are other abilities in their kit that require other attributes. And there are also all of the skill challenges and traps and puzzles and things like that actually in the game that are more attribute focused. The other side of it, the more combat side of it, is the abilities. Nightfeather starts with Piercing Strike and Quick Slash. And what you'll be able to see down at the bottom is you can actually upgrade these abilities. So you can spend XP to gain extra abilities, or you can spend XP to improve the existing abilities you've got. So take Quick Slash, for example. Whilst the damage output is relatively static, on a normal hit it does a wound, and on a critical hit it does like an additional effect. I think Nightfeather can make a dodge. You can actually upgrade Quick Slash to give you an extra +1 to hit, an extra +2, or an extra +3 to hit. And so you could end up with a level 3 Quick Slash, which combined with your Dex means you're rolling at +5 to hit, which obviously you're going to need to do the further into the dungeon you get and the more challenging the monsters and creatures you're coming up against are. So that's the 3 axes of upgrading your character: improve your attributes, buy abilities, or upgrade existing abilities. Now, we have a concept of paths. So Nightfeather ostensibly follows the path of shadows, and they are able to pick new abilities from the path of shadows without any restrictions whatsoever. But we want to create a system where you can create the character that you envisage. So Nightfeather can pick from the path of knowledge, which is what we call our magic using path, or the path of faith, if you want to take more kind of cleric style abilities, or the path of blood, which is more kind of warrior focused. There is a little bit of additional tax that you have to pay for that if you're kind of buying off path, as it was. But it does mean that you can create Nightfeather, who I think one of my favorite combos is Nightfeather picking up Azure Leap, which is a path of knowledge. It's basically it's Flash from League of Legends. You can kind of just flash into position and then do your stuff. It's brilliant for Nightfeather because they can flash into a really great spot, hit, get their dodge out, and then still move out. So it really supports Nightfeather's sort of hit and run approach to combat. Now, over on the left-hand side, you can also see Nightfeather comes equipped with a couple of items. Now, what we've chosen to do for Bardsung is the concept of legacy weapons. So Nightfeather will always have Crow's Murder and Raven's Talon. These are their 2 daggers that they use to stab enemies until they're dead. What you will see is, and this is still kind of work in progress graphic design, but one is predominantly an offensive weapon or an offensive item, and one is predominantly a defensive weapon or item. Now, as you're upgrading these weapons with the treasure and the gold that you find as you're exploring through the dungeons, they gain extra abilities, but you're able to really calibrate what those extra abilities are. So those are a lot more mechanical in nature. So it's usually things like +1 to hit, or does an additional point of damage, or puts this effect onto whoever you've hit. But if you put it on a defensive item, well, then that happens when you're defending. So Night Feather's pretty cool because when they use Crow's Murder to defend with, if you've put a couple of points in damage, if you've got some damaging gems that you've put into it, they're actually doing damage more as a riposte when someone's attacking them. So that's the other axis that you can really play with is how you choose to upgrade your weapons and your items, I should say, which are either offensive or defensive in nature, and how they combo in with the abilities that you choose, and then how much of the multi-class abilities do you then pick to find those wickedly deep combos that are just gonna proper alpha strike or wombo combo entire rooms. And I mean, look, I'm a League of Legends player. I love wombo combos as much as anyone. So find some of that crazy stuff because it's in there.
No, I don't think I can really follow that up with anything, Matt. I think you just about covered everything there.
Fair enough.
Just about. So the next one is, as your own IP, we have seen centaurs, elves, bird people, humans, and amazing turtles. Can you wow us with a new race or a type of creature, hero or enemy? And will there be gnomes? Did you pay him did you pay Dan to actually ask about gnomes?
Quite possibly, yeah. So in our current long-running game, I'm playing a gnome wizard with a massive ego. So yeah, there will be gnomes, largely because I want a mini for Calcivir. So there will be a gnome with a massive hat. What we want to do is really focus on delivering that core quintessential fantasy feeling. So everything should feel quite familiar. And one of the things I have a particular dislike for when I'm buying or reading a new fantasy novel or playing a new fantasy game is recognizing, well, that funny word that you've just made up is clearly just an elf. Why didn't you just call it an elf instead of a flower or whatever it is? And I really don't like having to kind of relearn whatever this version of fantasy is. So a lot of what you're going to see in the Bardsung world is what I'm calling classic quintessential fantasy. Now, we stray from the tropes in how we treat them. And a really good example of how we like to do that kind of stuff is what we've done with the Epic Encounter sets, for example. So we have your kind of traditional kobold tribe, but we've got a different kind of basilisk. We've got a lava belcher. So this is a much more fire-themed basilisk that works well with the kobold tribes. We've also got little kobolds riding fire serpents because we wanted like a fast attack style, cavalry style mini. So see a lot more opportunities for us to take traditional tropes and give them our unique design lens. And actually sort of embed them in the world, but in a really meaningful way, like a design-driven way. So that's probably more likely what we're going to do. I mean, look, D&D's been around for decades, and fantasy has been around for slightly longer. There is enough amazing stuff out there for us to never run out of ideas and things that we can bring to this game. But one of the things that I do think is going to be cool is because this is going to be the first in a long series of Bardsung products, we're able to kind of grow the world as we go. So I'm not going to spoil it too much, but there's something that you're going to discover in Bardsung, this first game, that's actually then going to effectively unlock as a playable, a playable race, for want of a better word, playable heritage that will be available in future Bardsung. So expect to see a lot of stuff like that. So as the world reveals itself through the products, the world will grow and broaden.
Yeah, I think that's very important. The idea that the narrative doesn't just stop with the actual end of the game, the sort of finale of the actual Bardsung of the game. It really is something where the world will grow, and at that point, returning players will start to see, kind of a continuing narrative, and sort of begin to emerge from what we're looking at, which is really exciting. So the next one is what other hero types will there be, which we've kind of already answered. What races? Kitsune, Dark Elf types. Again, we've kind of touched this on this this one, but the final part I'll just mention because it's important. Do you plan to have equal male or female hero options overall?
We definitely firmly believe in equality and equal opportunities and representation. So that is something that we carefully consider. So yes, there will be a proper representation in the types of heroes, both in terms of the races and heritages and the genders that they have. So yeah, that's locked in. Other races, well, look, hopefully everyone's seen the Centaur. That's a kind of a statement of intent. There will be lots of other races to kind of play with, and largely because it means that we get to make kind of cool minis of all the different races as well, which is, you know, another thing that kind of makes us incredibly happy.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about is not being limited, you know, is understanding we're not limited by saying, well, you know, X character is a dwarf or is an elf, which means they have to look a certain way or they have to operate a certain way in terms of mechanically. It's something where, again, those are really sort of wrappers effectively that you attach to a character. We think it's much more important that players can really attach what values they want to their characters, and the same with classes as well. Just really grow them how they want to grow them. That said, if you do want, and the same obviously goes for genders also, but at the same time, if you want a character to, you know, if you're looking for male or female characters, there absolutely will be heroes with more traditional features that you can identify them as such.
Yeah. Look, we started with Guild Ball. I'm a huge believer in proper. There's probably a fancy way of saying it, but I'm a simple creature. I like believable body shape and anatomy and types. So there will be all sizes and shapes. So, you know, have a look at the range of minis that we did for Guild Ball and see how we enjoy all different sizes and shapes, colors, creeds, and everything in between.
So next one, which is will a bard type character be playable?
That's a good question, actually. I think I actually think on balance, the answer will probably be yes. One of the things that we want to start revealing and sharing is how the bards actually have a really special place in our world, and so the bard character would need to be kind of really supportive of this overall theme that we want to you know, the story that we want to tell through bards. But bards are one of my favorite character classes to play, so I rather think that on the balance of probabilities, I won't be able to resist putting an awesome bard into the game. So I like control pieces. That's just my favorite way of playing any game is control pieces. So bards are brilliant at control.
Yeah, I think we've gone backwards and forwards on this a few times, but I know Matt's addiction to bards probably means we'll end up with one. So next one is, and again, we've kind of sort of touched on the bit about fantasy tropes and so on, so I'll just sort of compress this a little bit, which is who and what are the adversaries? Are they traditional creatures or are they new creatures from our collective imaginations?
Kind of a little bit of a mix. So definitely you're going to see things that are familiar. I don't think it's revealing too much to say, well, obviously there's hobgoblins and I think we've talked about there being bugbears in there. Bugbears and hobgoblins go hand in glove.
I don't know. That might be the first spoiler we dropped, Matt.
Oh, well, there you go. That's look, it's not the world's greatest spoiler, but a spoiler nonetheless. Hooray for us! Put a tick down in the box. I'm pretty sure we've shown some of the Durgar or Dwagar, depending on your preference for pronunciation. I'm a Durgar person. And I think we've also shown, I know the Crix got shown. Now, Crix is an interesting creature because people who are familiar with fantasy RPGs will probably recognize where we were inspired for that particular creature. And that's where we're able to exercise a little bit more creative freedom is take a traditional kind of fantasy creature or trope and just give it a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of X factor.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So we'll move on to some of the enemies now. Well, actually, no, it's more campaign play and then sort of touching on enemies. So How much is the game focused on campaign play, and how many hours of playtime do you think there will be?
Well, look, I've pulled this image out. So we've obviously slightly cheated and changed all the game text into awesome fantasy runes, just so there's no real spoilers in there. But so this is how we intend to sort of present an adventure. An adventure is a series of encounters and explorations as you're going through, and the story is unfolding and updating as you're making your way through this kind of network map, in order to achieve your objective. So you can sit down and just play an adventure in an evening or two's game, depending on how complicated it is. But the campaign is made up of many of these adventures. Because of the nature of the choose your own adventure style of it, and the fact that you can kind of backtrack and go back to places you haven't explored, you can take as long as you want to go through this game. But if you wanted to go through the shortest route, I think, what did we work it out? It'd be about, was it about 6 or 7 adventures is about the shortest route, not including tutorial and end levels?
Purely because it's just finalizing bits and pieces. I think it's 7 at the moment.
Something like that.
Yeah, sorry. I think it was 7. Yeah, if you include the tutorial, it's around this anyway.
So if you take the absolute shortest route, let's say it's sort of, I think it's sort of 6, 7, 8, something like that, and each one of them is 1, 2, or 3 gaming sessions, depending on how long you sort of sit down and play with each other. So if you kind of go with that, your quickest route through the campaign is probably 50 to 60 hours gameplay, but more likely you're going to be up in the 70, 80, 90 hours, I think, because you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have to reroute around, you're going to have successes and failures. So it's plenty of content in the box.
Yeah, and again, part of this leads into the emergent storytelling aspect of what you're talking about in terms of setbacks and having to go back around, that sort of stuff. Ways where you suddenly go, oh yes, we'll go the quickest way through this adventure possible, and then kind of be blocked off and have to reroute or whatever. And also, again, it's the fact that it's the replayability of it. It is, again, that maybe if you go through, get one ending, you're okay, that's fantastic. Let's go again and see if we can make different decisions and end up with a different ending and so on, and find out more about it. So I think that's very exciting.
One of the other things that's worth saying is because this encapsulates an entire adventure, and there's a story that's been told across this kind of 2-page spread with the aid of the card mechanics that we have. A lot of the sort of like the guest designers that we're working with, and internally, there's an awful lot of adventures that people are making that aren't necessarily part of the core campaign, but they are actually cool standalone adventures. So if you want to just play a standalone session, then you can just grab an adventure, and they will be available probably and I'm kind of projecting into the future. I'd love to see a big library of awesome adventures on the Steamforged.com website. And ideally, what I'd really like to get to is community generated content, so we can actually put that up there as well. So if you are just hanging out with some mates, and let's say your D&D game's kind of failed because the key guy or girl hasn't turned up, well then just grab this and just throw it down and play. If you don't want to get into the commitment of a full campaign setting, just play a standalone scenario.
Yeah, I think there's loads of engagement we can have. But Matt, I think you just dropped your second big spoiler of the thing, which is the guest designers. We haven't said anything about that just yet.
Awesome, that's 2.
You can see my pretend shock there. So let's quickly move on before marketing find us and get us. So how immersive is the role-playing aspect of the game, and how does it work? Is it just a case of reading a card and deciding which option to select on it? Or is there more of a role-play experience involved? Is there enough flavor in the game to give the option of one player running it as a DM, a narrator as they would like to do so, rather than playing as one of the heroes?
So this is like, I want to say this is almost an existential question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I think the role playing is immersive, or is as immersive as you want it to be. Now, I can't play a game like Monopoly without role playing to a certain degree, right? I can't. So, and the people that I tend to play games with are very similarly orientated. So, we can sit down and play poker, and one of us will be talking with a funny accent, and the next person, someone will be like overplaying their hand and hamming it up. Like, I just think that if you're that way inclined, what we've tried to do is give you raw fuel for however big your fire is. So if your fire is burning brightly and you love role playing and you love kind of extracting kind of story content where only the merest hint exists, well, actually, this is going to be a really fertile field. The other side of it, this is why it's a little bit sort of existential, is if you want to be entirely reductive, D&D is just someone reading a card and deciding what option you're going to do, right? It's just like the passageway goes to the left or the right. What do? We go left. I mean, unfortunately, we've all kind of played in those sort of D&D games as well. So it's really player driven, but our job is to make sure there's enough opportunities for you to really springboard off of and create your own story and your own role playing for this. And then, much like, I can't remember who I was chatting to, but much like when I was much younger and playing like Advanced Hero Quest back in the day, and we left the dungeon, we just carried on in character and we carried on doing our own stuff, bimbling around town and doing whatever the heck we were doing. So it's really player stroke group driven, I think.
Yeah, for me, I feel the best way to describe it is, if anybody's familiar with the game Gloom as a great example, you can play that game and you can literally just go read the card and go, oh, someone got married. Or alternatively, you can really tell the story behind what's happening there and really riff off of the theatre of the mind and really run with it.
And if sorry, mate, I was just going to say, and if you've got someone in your group who is your natural GM, we all have, one. We're lucky, we've got like 2 in our group. So, but if you've got that person who loves to sort of thesp it up and have cool voices, actually, there's enough depth in the game and enough interest in the way that the monsters and the AI is driven, that person could actually take a back seat and possibly even just run the game. You could have someone who is coordinating it all. Let's say you had six people turn up. Well, just have one person who has the best kind of Brian Blessed style voice and get them shouting the narrative out and controlling all the monsters. So
yeah, in a slightly less extravagant way, I know I've definitely done that at Resident Evil, for example, and created like an evil boss character who's just controlling all the enemies and so on, even if it is completely automated.
That's actually a brilliant example. So if anyone hasn't seen it, me and Sherwin played, sorry, terrible English, Sherwin and I did a playthrough of Resident Evil 2. My nan would be turning her grave. She would be horrified at me saying me and Sherwin. But if you want an example of how we see these emergent storytelling opportunities come, just go and watch how many times Jill runs away scared whenever a dog is heard howling in the
exactly it.
Or how the flickering lights suddenly turn into the air conditioning unit coming on, and suddenly like a zombie lurks through the window. Right. Yeah. That's Bardsung takes that system and puts it on steroids.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You just for future reference, you absolutely do not necessarily need someone like we have in our regular Star Trek group who insists on speaking in Klingon only throughout the entire game. Not everyone needs Richard August in their group. So moving on, what's the balance between combat and exploration? So we're definitely in gameplay territory now, Matt.
Gameplay territory. I
say this because you may look at this. See, we have the shots.
We run a slick machine, don't we?
Like, we
do. Well, look, you have to explore to find the stuff out there, and when you find the stuff, you then have to deal with it in order to carry on exploring. So it's really I'm hesitating slightly because I feel like I've got a bold statement inside of me, but I often think. I'm really fiercely critical of what we do and want to make sure that we're delivering the best experience we can. And one of my key barometers, whenever we finish a dungeon, when we're playtesting, a new mechanic or an idea, is I always sit back and say, would I be happy if we had played that as part of our D&D campaign? And more and more and more, I'm actually falling in love with how this exploration system works, because it's so difficult a pillar in D&D to capture exploration, and yet in Bardsung, it's such a core part of the experience. And there's so much game design philosophy that's built into why it's such a powerful experience. But but to kind of try and distill it down into a short soundbite is players always know, you always know where you want to go. The game doesn't always let you go where you want to go, but it doesn't stop you knowing what your goal is. And if you know what your goal is, it means that you can measure your successes and failures against that goal. And that's such a rewarding feedback loop. So as you can see in this picture, you know, this party is explored off to the right. They hit a T-junction straight away. They explored off to the right. They found a room, and then the portal leading out from that room actually ended up being a dead end. So they've had to backtrack and make their way through to the left-hand side, probably dealt with a couple of skill challenges and a combat before they found the exit from this particular section of the dungeon. Now, what is cool and isn't shown on here is wandering monsters are kind of making their way through the dungeon. So backtracking into the face of wandering monsters is usually quite a tense experience. So that's kind of one of, you know, sort of like the variables that kind of vacillates between, is this exploration decision making or is this combat or challenge making decision making? But the game flips you between both modes often and quickly, to the point where it feels like it's just a homogenous dungeon exploring experience.
I'll jump in a little bit there for some of our Resident Evil viewers as well, which is, I think the Wandering Monsters especially really appeals to me in the sense that they had a really lovely pressure to your exploration as well. So the Wandering Monsters are things that once players go through a certain area and they kind of leave the darkness behind them, things do change. It's not just a case of, hey, we've discovered this tile, we've killed everything on it, we can move on. The actual dungeon is evolving and changing behind you. Things will come chase you through the darkness and sort of, you know, slowly catch up on you and so on. There is pressure driving you forward, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
So next one, which is, what do the runes on the map do?
That's a smart question. I didn't
very smart question.
Pick up on that. So if you imagine that the blank mat is effectively the fog of war, and you're exploring the dungeon that exists in the fog of war, you just need to kind of go out and find it. The runes are actually places where we can hide treasures that are hidden out in the fog of war. And now sometimes you might be on an adventure where you're actually, you know where the end for that adventure is. It's a massive yawning kind of portal protected by a massive magical lock. And in order to get through it, you have to find the key. Well, the key will be an item card that you drag from the vault and you put into your treasure deck, along with a load of other kind of cool treasury items. And these are usually shards or of gems or whole gems. And these are the things that you use to power up your equipment that we talked about earlier. And you'll shuffle that all together. And then when you come to an encounter, it might say this has one lost treasure, in which case you'll put one randomly selected face down treasure card on one of these bees, one of these icons out in the fog of war. Now, if your exploration intersects with one of these tokens effectively, well, guess what? That token is now a thing that you found in that particular location. So if you're actually in a really rich, fertile encounter that has, you know, 3 or even 4 lost treasures in it, well, you might not just make a beeline straight from one side to the other. You might want to explore off to the right or off to the left, and try and capture, you know, find all of the treasures that are available from this particular dungeon. But like we see in this particular example, you headed off to the right, but you hit a dead end and you didn't get the treasures. And that's where the roguelike element comes in. Sometimes the game's just mean to you and doesn't give you what you want. And sometimes when you finish a dungeon and you pick up that lost treasure and it was the key that you wanted, you're like, it's got to go back into the treasure deck, and now you've got to carry on searching through the next part of the dungeon, hoping to find the key. So that's what they do.
Yeah, I think there's a few more other things as well, but for the moment, they're just. I think the slightly sort of a higher level answer I would normally give is something where they give us quite a lot of tools to give it alternative and extra objectives to the players. Yeah, and it can be items, as you obviously just discussed quite a lot. It could be certain areas or whatever we discover as people play through the campaign. They'll work out various different instances where they find these.
Yeah.
So next question, and this one's, we're starting to get into larger questions now, so I'll try and put these in an order that makes more sense. So how does combat work is the broad subject we're going to talk about, but let's start with tell us more about zonal combat. So
Zonal combat. So let's talk the difference between squares and zones.
Yeah, I think that's the building block, as it were, before we move into combos, which is coming up next.
Yeah. I'm going to skip past the slide I'm going to try and find where's a good slide that's got some zones that we can easily see. It's probably the one we're on, actually, to be fair. What you can see in world, as much as we can in the graphics, where we've marked zones out. Now, essentially, a square is a zone. But one of the things that we find when you make a zone only big enough to fit a single entity into it, i.e. a single mini, is something that we call pixel counting. So it becomes very, very granular very, very quickly, and the game has an incredibly different feel. And when you're dealing with 4 or 5 player characters and 4 or 5 hobgoblins and a wandering monster appears and then this thing and that thing, the actual physical interaction with the minis becomes a little bit fiddly, and the whole pace of the game slows down, and you kind of really lose a sense of the drama and a sense of the pacing. Whereas with zones, what you're actually able to do is be a little bit more kind of loosey-goosey about exactly where your mini goes. Doesn't really matter as long as you're in that kind of zone. So your movement interactions is a lot faster. Also, because we have half an eye on translating this into a full RPG experience, one of the ways I like running like D&D or Pathfinder is using kind of more theatre of the mind zone style situations. So all of our effects are zone based. They derive. So a fireball spell will affect a zone and a number of adjacent zones. And so you're able to move in to the zone and affect creatures in that zone. You can choose who you hit. They can choose who they hit. And that's pretty much the purpose of zones is just to give yourselves a little bit more flexibility and freedom with the movement. But essentially, never forget that a square is effectively just a really small zone that only fits one person in it.
Yeah, and I think just to tack onto that, I think that's the crucial bit. That is that final statement as well. Is think of a zone as a more forgiving for a new player square is the best way of saying it. It's something where for squares can be very useful for simply counting speeds and everything else, but simply put, zones they're just a really nice and free-flowing kind of version of what you could do in terms of movement or anything else for everybody, as you've said.
Yeah, I mean, look, really early versions of Bardsung worked on squares, but the minute we moved to zones, it was transformative. The game sped up massively. The combats actually became a lot more interesting because having the zone, instead of having to worry about engagement areas and things like that, actually cleaned up an awful lot of interactions and meant that we Fraser kind of captured it quite perfectly, which is there is a linear relationship between how complex your movement is and therefore how simple your actions need to be, or the calculations of your actions. So the simpler we can make our movement and targeting and all those kinds of things, actually the more complexity and depth we can put into the effect of the actions. So what you end up with is the best of both worlds, in our opinion, which is a really fast, fluid game to kind of move your minis to where they need to be. And then some really good, meaty, complex kind of actions and abilities that trigger off of that. So it really works well. As I say, when we kind of first put that on the table, it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that this was absolutely the right way to go.
Yeah, and I think that leads nicely into the next question, which is how do combos work? How reliant are certain characters on other ones?
Well, I like combos.
Really? I hadn't worked out.
Yeah, but I don't think they should be mandatory. So combos should be awesome bonus situations that you can set up. And one of the things that we did, I did kind of flick through quickly, is this concept of the marching order. Now, the marching order is essentially your initiative order, and you operate from left to right. And once you've finished an entire round, there's a little bit of tidy up that you do in the end phase, and then you pick all those cards up, you give them a shuffle, and then you lay them out for the next round of combat. And this way, the game state is changing from round to round, and order of activation is changing. Now, obviously, we have characters who have abilities and monsters who have abilities to affect the marching order. to kind of hold position on the marching order and manipulate who goes when. And that's an important part of being able to sort of set up combos and set up each other to do kind of cool effects. And so combos, I think, is a brilliant opportunity for player-to-player interaction. And for me, again, philosophically, player-to-player interaction is really where an awful lot of magic happens for any game that you play. And if we've all played those kind of really deep Euro-style games where you're literally locked in. I'm going to pick on it because it's really big, and I'm sure Jamie won't mind. But things like Scythe, you almost are playing by yourself up until the point where you suddenly then realize that you need to get a couple of battles under your belt in order to win the game, and then you kind of start, maneuvering out. What we want is combos to be so seductive and so awesome and so appealing that you're actually going out as quickly as you can to try and make them happen. And that's where you're then riffing off each other and setting each other up, and you start looking at the game state from a different set of eyes. So there's dozens and dozens and dozens of possible combos that we've discovered in our play testing, and as we flesh out the additional characters, it's exponentially going to grow.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think the most important thing for me, again, piggybacking on what you just said there, is especially in Horizon and Resident Evil, for example, is seeing players all sitting around the table and actually it sort of just clicks into place and everyone starts discussing the turn ahead, what they're going to do, how they're going to play. Like, hey, knock this enemy over to this square or whatever, so then I can attack them. That frees you up to then go on and open that door or whatever else, that sort of thing. That's always where the gameplay really starts to come out. But aside from that, what I think is what's really exciting about Bardsung is because we have the marching order, and also we then have the sort of more physical playing space, the more traditional one on the actual rooms and the actual zones. The players actually have multiple places they can really interact and have combos happening. It can be as simple as, hey, we can manipulate the marching order. I can pin somebody in place or move an enemy up or down the order. Or alternatively, it can be as simple as kind of hitting an enemy into the same square as another character who can then kill everybody with a big sweeping attack, for example, or a backswing. So there's lots and lots of different layers to this as well, which is really, really rewarding.
And I think just kind of building off of that, to kind of give it a technical term, because I think the question was, how do they work? So the combos aren't necessarily named combos. They're very much structured in the same way that a wombo combo exists in League of Legends, where someone does a thing that creates a game state, and then someone has an ability that is able to proc off of that game state. And proc is it's like a MOBA term for, I think it's process. It's basically, it's triggered by a thing. So, for example, Dawnguard, the half-orc cleric, has a push effect on their kind of basic attack. So if they attack the hobgoblin that's there right in front of Steelheart and successfully hits it, well, that hobgoblin will get pushed out to an adjacent zone. Now, because that frees up Stoneheart, you actually generate a point of momentum for that, and then Stoneheart actually is able to then proc off of that by using that momentum to do what they're going to do, or to they might have an ability that says follow up. So if an enemy model leaves their zone, they're able to follow them up. So they're going to proc off that and get a free movement. And we all know how powerful out of activation movement is to kind of board control. So it's stuff like that. So the combos are there. They're generally small, but they rapidly expand the more you can kind of layer them onto each other. And that's really where the depth comes out.
Yeah, what's also nice about this as well is, and we will move on, don't worry, everybody, but just a side note, because you can choose what character abilities you want, and you have such a large amount of freedom, you can really start to interact in very different ways as well. One group, for example, we talked about Azure Leap earlier, may really kind of work on kind of Night Feather, sort of almost spawning in, jumping in, pushing enemies away from them, then jumping back out again to then set up other players. Other people may be more of a bulldoze kind of thing, where you have Stoneheart charging through like a bulldozer, sort of knocking enemies around in all sorts of directions for allies to then finish off. There's loads and loads of different things that can interact with each other, and because of you have this quite a nice classless system, there's lots and lots of flexibility to it. So our next question is, how does Monster AI work?
So Monster AI works as simply as we possibly can. So the heroes are the stars of the show. The monsters have a simple way of gauging who their target is. The target is updated for each monster as it activates. So, for example, if you have a monster that targets unengaged heroes, then obviously the first monster will engage the nearest unengaged hero, or unengaged zone, I should say. And then the next one will say, well, that zone is now engaged. I'm going to move to the next zone. And we're able to manipulate that's hobgoblins or whoever they are, sort of spreading out and engaging the heroes one-on-one. Similarly, we can actually have the converse of it, where they're focusing engaged zones. And that is where you start seeing a bit more of like of a dog pile going on. So that's a lot more dangerous. And that's just a really simple example of how we manipulate the targeting to create a really different behavior. And then the next step kind of below that is really, in fact, have a look at how we do AI in Horizon, because it's that simple, short steps that are really easy to resolve, but actually have huge amounts of depth inside each of the steps. So the design intent is that the monsters take as little time as possible to resolve, but they feel different and dangerous, and they feel like they react. Now, the one cool thing that I will say, and this might be spoiler number 3, is a monster's behavior can change depending on your action. So, for example, let's say you've got a hobgoblin type who goes into a berserk rage when he suffers damage. Well, it might flip from one AI mode to the other AI mode, and you will start to learn this and then start to adjust how you're approaching that particular kind of fight, because you definitely don't want them all going into berserk at the same time.
Yeah, I also think it's worth mentioning as well that we have some enemy. We might have some enemies that just use the same language as used there. Say a hobgoblin type, a particularly a vengeful one, where if you actually defeat that enemy, rather than killing it, it scuttles off into the darkness. It will then seek you out in future encounters where you meet it. So it will actually then begin to remember who killed it and begin to work up a grudge, or maybe it'll order its buddies to come after you particularly.
Yep.
So we do actually start to have some really interesting depth layer into some of these AIs as well, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that leads us on to, will there be boss battles, and will they play differently from the regular minion battles?
Yes and yes.
Yeah, I can't wait for people to see Redacted as a name. It's going to be really, really cool.
Yeah, we've come up with something that we're actually really excited about. So we're able to run deep, complex boss battles. There's no wound tracking required. You're able to see the results of your actions and your attacks immediately. Every time you successfully strike a monster or affect it, it changes the way that monster is going to behave and what it's going to do, and it is a ongoing strategic tactical battle to kind of take out a boss fight. I think one of the things that's probably good to kind of point out is we're heavily influenced on our bosses by amazing games like Mario, and the boss fights in there with the multi-stage feel to the boss fights as they escalate in seriousness and complexity and how they deal with, and I'm not going to go too deep into it here. I'm going to save that for a later conversation, because there is an awful lot to talk about how the boss fight's going to work. What I will say, though, is the boss fights take place in a much larger space. So do you think it's inappropriate to kind of say that we flip the battle mat over and on the other side is a much larger space?
Well, I think you've done it now, irrespective of whether we think it's appropriate or not to say it. I think it's more, it's not like you promised that we can actually see if we can do playable versions of it for the Kickstarter or anything.
No, right?
We'll see what we can do, because I definitely think people definitely want to see that. So
I think so as well. So yeah, they will play very, very differently. There will be mini boss fights as well, and there are set pieces in here. So it's worth saying that most of the encounters that you play will be the procedurally generated ones, but there are some set piece encounters in the adventures where we want a little bit more control over how the tiles are laid out. Maybe there's a particular experience or gameplay mechanic that we want to put in place. So there will be a couple of set pieces that will tell you how to lay the tiles out. Obviously, we're careful about how many of those we put in, because that's going to increase the setup time for that particular encounter. but the fact that we're able to then absolutely control what rooms are connected to what and in what way means that we can then go a little bit more deeper into controlling precisely, the gameplay challenge that particular encounter is going to present to the heroes.
So next one, there's quite a larger question, but I'll try to sort of cut it in as much as best I can, because it's quite a lot to take in. So I read an article that mentioned events are more than just cards you make choices on, and that things can happen that have unexpected results. One of them mentioned that if you fail to fix a water pipe, it could flood the dungeon.
Yep.
Could we get some other examples of these types of possible occurrences in the game and how they affect gameplay?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is other one that springs to mind is obviously gas is another effect that we have. So we do have these environmental effects. They have different behaviors depend on the type. So obviously, water tends to flow and fill. It obviously fills a volume, but it also has a flow to it. Whereas gas tends to expand to fill until the gas has kind of run out. So they're similar but different. Now, the gas, I think the last design week we had like a small kind of gas trap went off, and it actually ended up blocking out a room. But it's not a permanent block. It's just if you go in this room, you're going to start, choking and taking damage. So we left that one and went off, but unfortunately we had to sort of backtrack through, and I think we got ambushed just the other side of it by a wandering monster. So that ended up kind of being a bit of a pain in the neck to deal with, actually, but it wasn't as bad as if it was water and you're trying to wade through the water and having the fight. So there's a number of different environmental effects. There's all the things that you would imagine.
I think sorry, good Matt. I was going to say, I think a really good example is the switches you mentioned earlier. So it could be, for example, that you walk into a certain area, portcullis slams down. Then at that point, you may find a switch. Pulling that switch may actually open up the portcullis. Alternatively, it may do something else completely unexpected. There's various different things, and because we have card systems that can change what that interaction, for example, with that lever may be, in terms of what gets drawn and how that affects different things. There's lots and lots of variables that will just simply that the game naturally builds into itself, without necessarily needing to kind of adhere to very strict, obvious examples such as putting down a token and then expanding that token at the end of every turn. There's a few different examples there.
Well, and we're actually able to track things like that. So let's take that. That's a really powerful but simple example. Is you find a lever, like we've all played Tomb Raider. You find a lever, you pull it, right? Then something's going to happen. They wouldn't put the lever there otherwise. Well, you don't actually know with Bardsung what that lever's doing until you find the results of that lever. Now that pulling that lever, way we track that is you will then take a card that says lever pulled, and it might be a specific lever or it might be a generic lever. And then on that dungeon, or maybe further encounters down the track, or maybe in the set piece kind of mini boss fight right at the very end, the number of levers you've pulled will have an impact on the game and have a very specific effect. And you're able to kind of correlate those two events. And oh God, they actually do link together, right? So that lever we pulled 2 dungeons ago is actually, open the rubbish chute to this bit. And now this area is blocked off and we have to kind of backtrack and go through the other way. So choices, do have impact.
So I think we're moving now into the sort of away from some of the gameplay mechanics and looking at some other bits and pieces. So Jonas wants to know if the end goal is to be a hero worthy of songs, what will that look like in practice? Is there a plaque on the tavern wall? We'd love to see a mechanic for us being a hero of lore in life or death, and not just they sang his or her praise until the next hero came along at the end of the campaign.
So we are really close to locking in a system that's going to do this. That I don't really want to say too much about it at the moment, but your song is built as you go through the game and is dependent on the things that you achieve in the game. And at any point, you're able to nostalgically look back at the song that you've built thus far and see the story and remember the story of what you've achieved through the campaign up until that point. And then when you get to the final massive climax, and you finish that, you're actually able to sit back and see your entire saga or your entire song, laid out in front of you.
Yeah, I think, and again, because we talked about doing future Bardsung products, or future Bardsongs, which are really about the world, set in the same world, there's no reason why the success of adventurers can't carry on into the next ones, in terms of whether they're kind of fabled lore, whether they're something else. Yeah, there's going to be continuity between games, and I think that's very important for sort of giving you that sensation, or that feel.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one, next one we're looking at is, these kind of really tie into a lot of stuff about what you mentioned earlier, with potential of expanding outside of the game, which is, so is there a phase between adventures where characters can get to do all sorts of stuff? And I'll type this into another one, which is, how much of the lore of the world, characters, factions, will you write about? So I think at this point we're really looking at, we have this amazing sort of immersive world that we can really start to draw into, and we can definitely start to look at that as in sort of more traditional RPG terms. In the actual Bardsung game, there isn't, because players are going ever deeper into sort of, I don't really want to give away too much of the background of the location, but they're kind of going effectively ever deeper into a dungeon. There's not necessarily a point where they're going to go back to the town to kind of go up to, get up to all sorts of random misadventures and so forth. But exactly like Matt has talked about before, players absolutely do have the choice after they finish the game, because Bardsung is such a flexible engine, to make their own adventures and kind of carry on with their characters and go and do bits and pieces. There's no reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. And if it's very flexible to give you that option to make homebrew scenarios or whatever else. Unless you want
no,
cool.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're going to build this world out in the way that we should all be world building, and that is we're going to focus on a cool area where the heroes are right now, and there is a conflict that needs to be dealt with.
Wow.
And then in the next version, in the next Bardsung product, there'll be another area of the world, and the world will kind of grow as we release more adventures and more campaigns, and more heroes.
So should I have a look through, because we're answering a lot of these questions at the same thing. So here's an interesting one, which is there any potential compatibility with the epic encounter sets?
Absolutely. I mean, look, the minis are the same scale, so yes. If you are looking to kind of create your own content for Bardsung, then you can definitely look at the kobolds and the winter orcs and future epic encounter sets. Would we be crazy to not put together a awesome red dragon boss fight? Yes, we would be crazy to not do that. So
you have to give marketing something to reveal every so often.
No, do you know what? I've been good for like weeks and not really said anything. So like, let's just get it all out. No, I think Epic Encounters gives us access to even more minis, even more potential for cool adventures to write and put out there. So yeah, there's absolutely physical compatibility and certainly an intent to make these products kind of work nicely together.
Yeah, I think so. People, astute followers will notice that God Tier also has the same sort of scale for models.
Oh, yes,
well.
it does.
So, so that leads us on. Speaking of other games, so the miniatures, exactly what type of material will they be?
Exactly, chemical composition.
Yeah, you better get out of the whiteboard and start drawing it down.
It's a proprietary blend PVC that we've spent quite a lot of time working R&D wise with our manufacturing partners. That's the main material. For certain parts of the Mini, we will use an ABS plastic, which is a lot stiffer, a lot harder plastic. So for things like weapon halves and spears and stuff like that, we would use an ABS for that. And we also use ABS plastic for the base because it is much more rigid and it doesn't warp at all. And sometimes, when you pick up these kind of 100% PVC minis, the bases are a little bit warped just through the curing process, which, top tip, if you want to fix, literally just stand the mini in a bowl of boiling water for about 10 seconds and then put it onto your kind of kitchen counter and just push it down so the base just flattens out because it's nice and soft. And then the PVC will recure and lo and behold, you'll have a nice straight base again. But we don't really want you to do that with With this product, the ABS base gives you that hard, flat base, and it's ever so slightly denser than PVC, so it's ever so slightly bottom heavy, which is a really nice tactile feeling to the Mini. You know, it's just something, it's just nice when you put a Mini down and you know the base is slightly heavier than the Mini. It just feels a little bit more sturdy when you're putting it down.
Or if you have one of those really clumsy people, where you just lob dice across the table and smash everything over.
Also
that too. So the last one, the last question we've got here, which is, how big a play space do I need to play on? How big is the mat we're trying to cross?
So I'm not going to give you specifics. It's sort of 22-ish, 24-ish inches across, 31-ish, 32 inches along the long side. What we're trying to do is make sure that this fits inside the kitchen table.
Yeah.
Unlike some of our kind of, actually dearly loved dungeon exploring games, you kind of know the boundaries before you start. So you're not actually having to find a new extension for your kitchen table because you've ended up going off to the left. You kind of know where it is, but it'll fit into a normalish kind of kitchen table with enough room to, if you've got a table big enough for 4 or 5 people to sit around, you've got a table big enough to play this game. And all your doodads and tokens and cards and everything like that.
Yeah, I always whenever we're doing any testing, I always have a 3x3 space. The golden rule is that no game ever can go across that, and normally most generally tend to fall under that by quite a way, because it's simply put that's the generally rough size of most people's kitchen tables. We don't ever want to go beyond that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I think that's more or less us run out of questions, and certainly run out of time. It's gone over by quite a bit.
Have we?
But yeah. Well, I mean, I know we sort of set apart sometimes. It's going to be a monster video for people to watch.
Probably. Well, if you've got to the end, well done you. The challenge unlocked, or achievement unlocked. Don't forget we're trying to pick the lucky hero that's going to join our band of 4.
Do you want me to do a little bit more of a more precise language there for that one?
Go Lion Soul. Come on, Lion Soul.
So remember our community engagement program. What we've currently got, everybody, is you're all voting on which one of these lucky, as Matt says, lucky heroes to be will be joining our party of 4, become 5. Lion Soul would be awesome because we've got some amazing ideas for Lion Soul, but also turtles are apparently a thing. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But that's still running at the moment. So please do join the Facebook group, the Bardsung group, and get voting in there.
Yeah.
And the next tab, of course, is that we are launching the Kickstarter on the 10th of November. And please do sign up to be notified when it goes live. If we can get 2,500 followers on that, then we'll unlock Glade Strider, who's
Glade Strider.
Yep, exactly. Who's
he's
not only
but he's got 4 legs.
Yep, he's not only a character from a Bond movie, apparently, but also is a Kickstarter exclusive player character who is possibly one of the most awesome hero models I think I've ever seen for any game.
Yeah, please get this one because I definitely want to play this this character.
Yeah, it's druids are cool, and our druid is, well, badass. So.
Right.
So yes. Please do sign up, and I think that's more or less us run out on a Saturday afternoon / evening now.
Yeah, sounds about right. So I think well, let's wrap it up nice and quickly then. So I've been Matt. Thank you very much,
and I've been Sherwin.
Adios, amigos.
Bye, guys.